The snow began falling over Beacon Hill just as the street lamps flickered to life, casting pools of amber warmth across the cobblestone streets of Boston. Christmas Eve had arrived with the kind of quiet that only winter knows how to bring, muffling the sounds of the city beneath layers of white, transforming the historic neighborhood into something lifted from a half-remembered dream. Inside Holloway's Haven, the small cafe on Charles Street hummed with the gentle chaos of the holiday season. Families crowded around tables pushed together, their laughter rising and falling like music. Couples shared slices of warm apple pie, their fingers intertwined across checkered tablecloths. Children pressed their faces against frost-rimmed windows, watching snowflakes dance in the glow of Christmas lights. And in the corner, at the table nearest the window, a man sat alone. Callahan Mercer had occupied the same seat every Christmas Eve for 15 years. The ritual had begun as penance and slowly hardened into habit, the way grief often does when we refuse to release it. He came to this cafe because his wife Genevieve had loved it, because they had spent their last Christmas Eve together at this very table, because some desperate part of him believed that returning might somehow bring him closer to that night before everything shattered. His coffee had grown cold 20 minutes ago. His coat was already half on, his body positioned toward the door as if calculating the shortest path to escape. This was how he lived now, always halfway out of every room, always ready to leave before anyone could ask him to stay. The watch on his wrist cost more than most people earned in a year. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from board members and investors who saw his wealth as a resource to be tapped. Callahan Mercer had built an empire from nothing, had seen his name printed in Forbes and spoken with reverence in boardrooms across 3 continents. And none of it mattered. None of it had ever filled the hollow space that Genevieve and their daughter Emmeline had left behind. Behind the counter, Margaret Holloway watched him with knowing sadness. She was 68 years old and had owned this cafe for 4 decades, long enough to remember when Callahan used to come here with his wife and daughter, when his laugh could fill the entire room, when he would lift little Emmeline onto his shoulders so she could see the Christmas decorations. That man had been gone for 15 years. What remained was a ghost wearing expensive clothes, going through the motions of living without ever actually being alive. Callahan was already standing, reaching for the door, when a small voice stopped everything. "Sir, you won the golden ticket to spend Christmas with us." He turned slowly and found himself looking down at a girl who could not have been more than 7 years old. She had serious dark eyes that seemed to see far more than a child should, and she stood before him with an air of absolute certainty that seemed too large for such a small person. In her hands, she held a piece of thick construction paper decorated with gold marker and glitter that caught the cafe lights. The ticket was handmade, imperfect, the letters slightly crooked, but clearly crafted with extraordinary care. "Those are the rules," she added, her voice carrying quiet conviction. "You are not allowed to be alone on Christmas." Callahan opened his mouth to offer a polite refusal when the girl reached into her pocket and pulled out something else, a photograph. Worn at the edges, creased from being folded many times, the colors faded with age. "My mama found this in our apartment when we moved in. The lady who lived there before left it behind. I think you knew her." Callahan's blood turned to ice. The photograph showed a younger version of himself, his arm around a woman with auburn hair, a little girl perched on his shoulders with arms spread wide like wings. They were laughing, all 3 of them, caught in a moment of pure joy. They were sitting at this table, in this cafe, on a Christmas Eve 15 years ago. Genevieve, Emmeline, the family he had lost. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This child lived in the apartment that had belonged to Genevieve's mother, Eleanor. The apartment Callahan had inherited but could never bring himself to enter. The apartment he had maintained anonymously for years, never knowing who lived there. A woman appeared beside the child, slightly breathless, her face a mixture of mortification and concern. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of tired beauty that suggested she carried more weight than anyone should carry alone. Ren, you cannot just walk up to strangers and invite them to Christmas dinner. I am so sorry, sir. But Callahan was not listening. He was staring at the photograph, at the ghost of a life he had spent 15 years trying to forget. Where did you get this? His voice came out rough, scraped raw by emotions he had not allowed himself to feel in years. It was in a box in the closet, Wren said. Mrs. Holloway told me about the lady in the picture. She said her name was Eleanor and she waited a long time for her daughter to come home, but she never did. Eleanor, Genevieve's mother, a woman who had lost her only child and spent her remaining years waiting for a homecoming that would never happen. Margaret Holloway appeared at his elbow. I told Wren about the photograph. She showed it to me last year. I recognized you immediately, Callahan, and Genevieve, and little Emmeline. Her voice cracked. I was the one who took that picture. Christmas Eve, 15 years ago. Rosalie Ashford, for that was the woman's name, looked from Margaret to Callahan, clearly trying to piece together a story she had walked into without understanding. I own that building, Callahan heard himself say. I have owned it since Eleanor passed away 5 years ago. I could never bring myself to go there. Rosalie's expression shifted to understanding. You were the daughter's husband, the man in the photograph. Callahan nodded, unable to speak. Wren tugged gently on his coat. The golden ticket is still valid. You are not choosing to be alone when you do not have to. That is what it says on the back. Callahan turned the ticket over and saw the words written in careful letters. You are not choosing to be alone when you do not have to. Such a simple sentence. Such an obvious truth. And yet it named something he had refused to admit for 15 years. Rosalie placed her hand on Wren's shoulder. We should go. We have taken enough of this gentleman's time. But as they turned toward the door, Wren placed the golden ticket on Callahan's table beside the photograph, past and present colliding in the warm light of the cafe. The ticket is yours if you want it, she said, but you have to decide. Callahan watched them walk into the snowy night, his hand hovering over the golden ticket. Margaret touched his arm. Go. Genevieve would want you to go. He picked up the photograph and the ticket, tucked them into his pocket, and walked out into the snow. Callahan followed them through the snow-covered streets of Beacon Hill, telling himself he would turn back at any moment. But his feet kept moving past brownstones decorated with wreaths, past families hurrying home with packages, past the world celebrating while he walked through it like a shadow. The route grew painfully familiar. There was the corner where Emmeline had learned to ride her bicycle. There was the park bench where he had proposed to Genevieve. There was the church where they had been married. All of it had ended on a highway 10 miles from here, on a Christmas Eve that should have been full of celebration. Genevieve had been driving home from her mother's apartment, Emmeline asleep in the back seat, when a drunk driver ran a red light. They had died on impact. Callahan had not set foot in Eleanor's apartment since the funeral. He had paid the taxes, hired a management company, let strangers live in spaces where his happiness had once been stored. Now he was about to find out what that life looked like. Rosalie and Wren stopped at a brick building with brass numbers reading 247. Rosalie turned, her expression neither surprised nor hostile. I thought you might come. Wren was certain of it. I am not sure I can go in there, Callahan admitted. I have not been inside since before my wife died. Wren's small face appeared in the doorway. The apartment is not scary. It has our drawings on the walls and smells like the cookies we baked yesterday. The sad lady who used to live there went somewhere. She is not waiting anymore. Rosalie extended her hand, not reaching for him, but offering. You do not have to come in if you are not ready, but the golden ticket has no expiration date. Callahan thought about his empty penthouse, the Christmas morning stretching ahead like a desert. He thought about the words on the ticket. You are not choosing to be alone when you do not have to. He crossed the threshold for the first time in 15 years. The apartment had been transformed. What Billionaire had decorated with antiques was now filled with children's drawings taped to walls, second-hand furniture arranged for comfort, books stacked in precarious towers. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments. It was modest and slightly chaotic and unmistakably alive. The evening unfolded with simple grace. They ate soup and bread. Wren explained the history of every ornament on the tree. Callahan discovered his hands were clumsy at making paper snowflakes, but Wren declared them perfect anyway. Later, Wren disappeared into her room and returned carrying a worn cardboard box. I found this in the closet when we moved in. I think the things inside were waiting for you. Inside were birthday cards in Emmeline's handwriting, a dried flower from Genevieve's wedding bouquet, photographs Callahan had never seen, and at the bottom a letter, addressed to Callahan in Genevieve's elegant script. Never opened. The letter was dated the morning of the accident, Christmas Eve, 15 years ago. His hands trembled as he read. My dearest Callahan, I am writing this while you sleep because I cannot wait another moment. I have been keeping a secret, the most wonderful secret. I am pregnant. The doctor confirmed it yesterday, 12 weeks along. A boy, they think, a son, a brother for Emmeline. Tonight, after Emmeline goes to bed, I am going to tell you everything. I am going to watch your face when you realize what I am saying, and I am going to remember that moment for the rest of my life. I love you more than I have words for. Forever yours, Genevieve Callahan sat on the floor, holding a letter from a wife who had been full of hope just hours before dying, and felt his world collapse and rebuild simultaneously. He had not just lost Genevieve and Emmeline that night. He had lost a son he never knew existed. The tears came without warning, 15 years of grief finally finding release. He wept for his wife and daughter and the child he would never hold. He wept for Eleanor, who had spent her final years waiting alone. He wept for himself, for all the years spent running instead of carrying the weight. A small hand touched his arm. Wren had settled beside him. My daddy left and did not come back. He chose to leave because he was not brave enough to stay. But your family did not choose to leave. They went somewhere you could not follow. That is different. Callahan looked at this child who had found words no therapist had ever managed. You are very wise for 7 years old. I know. Mama says I was born with an old soul. Late that night, Callahan's phone buzzed with a message from Theodore Banks, his business partner. Emergency board meeting 8 a.m. tomorrow. Meridian acquisition, $3 billion at stake. Where are you? He stepped onto the small balcony and dialed Theodore's number. Cal, tell me you're coming back. The board needs you. I am not coming tomorrow, Theodore. This is a $3 billion deal. You cannot disappear on Christmas Day. I am not disappearing. I am exactly where I need to be. Handle the meeting. I trust you. A long pause. Then Theodore's voice softened. Genevieve would be proud of you, Cal. Merry Christmas. When Callahan stepped back inside, the armor he had worn for 15 years felt like something he could finally set down. Callahan spent Christmas Eve night on Rosalie's worn couch, covered by a quilt that smelled of lavender. He slept deeper than he had in years. He woke to unfamiliar sounds, footsteps, clinking dishes, someone singing softly. The sounds of domestic life he had forgotten existed. Wren was already awake near the Christmas tree. You stayed. I knew you would. Mama said you might leave, but I told her you were tired of running. How did you know that? Because you looked at the photograph for a long time. People who want to run look away. You looked right at it. Christmas morning unfolded gently. Wren opened modest presents with genuine delight. Colored pencils, a stuffed rabbit, a book about constellations she immediately began reading aloud. Later, Rosalie excused herself for a phone call. Through thin walls, Callahan heard fragments. Surgery, cardiac, payment plan. When she returned, her smile was practiced, bright but cracking at the edges. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. She glanced at sleeping Wren. "Just hospital business," but the weight showed in her shoulders. It was not until that afternoon, when Wren napped surrounded by new treasures, that Rosalie's composure finally broke. She was washing dishes, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I heard the phone call," Callahan said gently. She turned, tears streaming. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand you are carrying something too heavy alone." She wiped her eyes. "I have a heart condition, congenital, getting worse. I need surgery I cannot afford. Without it, the doctors say maybe a year." She looked at Wren. "I have been making arrangements. My sister agreed to take her." The words hung heavy, a mother preparing for her own death while her daughter dreamed of constellations. "I am not telling you this so you will fix it," she added quickly. "I know who you are. I looked you up. Callahan Mercer, the billionaire. But I am not asking for charity." "Then why tell me?" "Because you asked. Because I am exhausted from pretending. Because you understand what it means to carry something too heavy alone." Callahan was silent, thinking about his empty penthouse, the fortune doing nothing, Genevieve's letter still in his pocket. "Your problems are not mine to solve," he said finally. "But I have money I will never spend, and you have a daughter who needs her mother. I am not offering charity. I am offering to remove an obstacle so you can keep living. There is a difference." Rosalie's defenses wavered. "Why would you do that? You do not even know us." "Because 15 years ago, I needed help and no one was there. Because your daughter gave me back something I thought I had lost. Because maybe this is what Genevieve would have wanted me to do with money that never made me happy." He pulled out the golden ticket. "This says I am not choosing to be alone when I do not have to. It works both ways. You do not have to fight alone either." Rosalie stared at him, emotions cycling across her face. Pride, fear, hope. "I do not know how to accept help." "Neither did I. Maybe we can learn together." She extended her hand. Callahan took it. "Okay," she whispered. 1 year later, Christmas Eve arrived again in Beacon Hill. Inside Holloway's Haven, the corner table held 3 people. Callahan Mercer was laughing, real laughter, the kind he had not experienced in 15 years. Rosalie Ashford sat beside him, transformed. Her surgery had been successful 8 months earlier. The dark circles were gone. The weight she had carried alone had found other shoulders. And Wren, now 8, sat between them with the satisfied expression of someone whose plans had worked out exactly right. Behind the counter, Margaret Holloway watched with tears streaming. She was witnessing what she thought she would never see again. Callahan Mercer laughing. Wren pulled golden tickets from her pocket, more carefully crafted than last year's. "I made extras. Mrs. Holloway helped with the cutting." She turned to the window. "There is a man out there who looks like he needs one." Callahan saw an elderly gentleman on a bench across the street, watching families pass, with an expression he recognized immediately. "Would you like me to go with you?" Wren shook her head. "You did it alone last year. So will he. That is how it works." She buttoned her coat and headed outside. Rosalie took Callahan's hand. "She learned this from watching you, the courage to offer connection without knowing if it will be accepted." Through the window, Callahan watched Wren approach the elderly man and hold out a golden ticket. He could not hear her words, but he knew them. "Sir, you won the golden ticket to spend Christmas with us." The man's confusion slowly transformed into something else, the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. He stood. Wren took his hand and led him toward the cafe. Inside, Margaret prepared another coffee. Rosalie shifted to make room, and Callahan stood to welcome a stranger named Harold, a widower who had lost his wife to cancer and his son to an unresolved argument, into the circle that had saved his life. Watching Harold enter with uncertain steps, Callahan recognized the beginning of a journey he himself had started just 12 months before. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, and behind it came someone who did not yet know his life was about to change. Later that night, Callahan stood alone at the cafe window. The snow had stopped. Church bells rang midnight. In his pocket, he still carried the original golden ticket, now framed at home, but photographed on his phone for moments when loneliness tried to return. Rosalie appeared beside him. "What are you thinking?" "How strange life is. Losing Genevieve and Emmeline eventually led me here. If they had not died, I never would have met you and Ren. The tragedy I ran from was the only path to this life. Maybe it is not about making sense of it. The loss was real. This is real too. They do not cancel each other out. They just exist together." Ren asked once if Genevieve and Emmeline were still waiting for me somewhere. "What do you think now?" "I think they have been with me all along, in the capacity for love I thought I had lost. Maybe they were just waiting for me to stop running long enough to feel them again." Rosalie slipped her hand into his. Behind them, Ren slept at the table. Harold had left with lighter steps, a golden ticket in his pocket, and the first genuine smile he had worn in years. The tradition continued. The circle expanded, and Callahan Mercer, the man who had spent 15 years running from everything that mattered, had finally discovered what a 7-year-old girl had known all along. You are not choosing to be alone when you do not have to. Those are the rules.